Whoa!
I was curious. Yeah.
Good evening. Who's that? Can you hear me? Huh? Well, I want to welcome everybody and thank you for coming here tonight. We've got some challenging issues to discuss with you, and I want to let everybody know that we're doing this. We've got this online as well, so there's a number of people that are going to be joining us online. The victim told me that if you have questions, and we want this to be a dynamic, no presentation, but a real discussion. We need your input tonight. And so when you do have questions, we're going to ask you to come up if you feel comfortable and use one of the microphones. That way the people who are watching online will be able to hear everything. We're going to start tonight's meeting. And let me introduce myself in case you don't know me. I'm Mike Boonen. I'm on the Parish Council, and I'm one of the two lay trustees here at our parish. The other one being Denise Nunziato, who will be here front and center, but she's out of town, and she's probably going to be watching this online and participating that way. So first order of business today, I'm going to ask Father Rod to come up and start us with an opening prayer.
Thanks. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming. Appreciate to those of you who are watching and streaming. I'm going to start on a little light note. So, Mike, what was the occasion? Oh, I know what it was. We brought together our finance ministry and parish pastoral council a couple weeks ago or so here. And this guy says to me, this is the first time I've been in this building since the church was built. I said, you're kidding me. I said, really? I've been here a lot of times even before I was pastor. So then I said to him, you have to join the men's fellowship. So there's another clock, tall you out there. Leo, grab him tonight, okay? So let us pray. Almighty and ever faithful Lord, gratefully acknowledging your mercy, and humbly admitting our need, we pledge our trust in you and in each other. Filled with desire, we respond to your call for discipleship by shaping our lives in the imitation of Christ. Profess that the call requires us to be stewards of your gifts. As stewards, we receive your gifts gratefully, cherish, and tend to them in a responsible manner, and share them in practices and love with others, and return them with increase to the Lord. We pledge to our ongoing formation as stewards and our responsibility to call others to the same endeavor. Almighty and ever faithful God, it is our fervent hope and prayer that you, who begun this good work in us, will bring it to fulfillment in Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen. Amen.
Okay, so as I mentioned, we really truly want this to be a dynamic back and forth, and not just us giving lections. The main topic tonight is going to be to talk about the 2023 financial outlook. That is the main topic. But I'm going to speak about one other thing that I know all of you have on your mind, and that's the elephant in the room, which is the bankruptcy at the diocese and the impact it's going to have on Transfiguration. We've been asked not to share the number. We know it. We're going to share it tonight. The diocese really doesn't want us to the different parishes to announce the number yet, because it's not done. It's pretty close to being done. It's with the courts now. They've reached a settlement with the other side, but it's still got to go through the courts, so things could change. But later on, you'll see that we will talk about the number. So let's talk a little bit about the settlement. And I think it's important, this first bullet is very important, because this is something that we all got upset about. You know, why did it happen? We had nothing to do with it. It's just not fair. And there's a lot of anger out there, and people are upset about it, rightly so. But we need to keep in mind that the payment that we're making, and all the parishes and the dioceses are making into this trust fund, is ultimately about bringing healing and closure to the victims and their families. I don't think we can pay them enough for what they've done through. So let's be remembered for the Christ-like response to how we do respond to what's happening. It's not anything that we wanted. And as I said, it's very understandable that many people are upset, angry, and mad. I was one of them. So let's move forward. Okay, as of right now, the payment that all the parishes have to make is due June 1st. And the payments aren't going to the diocese. I want to make sure you understand it. They're going into a trust fund, and that trust fund will be used to pay out to the victims of sexual abuse. The CMA funds that we are all contributing to right now, none of that can be used for this settlement. It's restricted specifically for the purpose of the CMA. And then there was a formula that the diocese had to use, and there's nothing we can do about the formula, but I want to just take you through it very quickly. They took the total amount that needed to come from the parishes. As you recall, I think a lot of people got upset about this. The bishop first came out and said, the parishes aren't going to have to be part of this settlement. And I think we all said, okay, that's nice to hear. Later on, as they got into the whole lawsuit, the battle, it became pretty clear that certain parishes were named, and it made pretty clear to the attorneys that in order for us to do this, the parishes would have to be part of it. And one of the things that are included in this settlement, and I'm not an attorney, and I know there are a couple here that can speak up. One of the things that is in the settlement is something called the channeling injunction. And what that means is that any future claims that come forward, or existing claims that we don't even know about, as they come forward, as long as you're part of this settlement as a parish, we'll be covered. We won't be held liable. So that's one of the reasons we're going to go forward and basically have to participate in this settlement. So the diocese looked at the amount of money in total they had to come up with from the parishes, and then they split it into 4 different equal pieces, 25%, 4 25% pieces. And the first part is just based on the number of Catholic households in each parish. There's a database that the diocese have, not too much we can do with it, but based on the number of Catholic households in our area and our boundary, compared to all the other parishes, that's the percentage of payment that we would have to make in that particular quartile. The next one is the CMA goal. Every parish in our diocese got a CMA goal. Our goal compared to the denominator of all the other ones, that's the percentage of that quartile that we're going to have to pay. Then they looked at the 2021 to 22 actual collections in each parish. Did the same thing. How did Transfiguration compare when you use the denominator of all the other collections in our diocese? And then lastly, and this is an area that because we're doing pretty well, we probably pay a little bit bigger share than the other three. They looked at the unrestricted assets of each parish as of 6/30 last year, and they're going to use that as the, again, our unrestricted asset total compared to the total other of the entire diocese, and that's the percentage that we would have to pick up in that quartile. So when you do all that, we're not there yet. I do want to tell you, it's an amount that's going to probably shock a lot of people. And you're going to get angry about it. And that's what we're here to share with you and try to answer any questions. Again, the diocese doesn't want us to do this. We're going to do it. We don't want to hide anything. We want to be as transparent as possible. So the number right now that's on the table for Transfiguration is $396,000. That's our share. I will tell you that outside of insurance, The amount that the diocese and all the parishes together are putting into this fund is 55 million. So our share of that 55 million is about $396,000. So I'd like to say that's the end of it. The elephant's leaving the room, but I want to open it up for questions because I know a lot of you have questions.
Mike, could you define the difference between restricted and unrestricted funds, or will you get to that when we talk about where these funds are coming from?
I'll do the best to try to answer. I used to be a CFO. We have our CFO here that can answer that. But to be honest with you, as a CFO, you would love any extra funds that you have to be unrestricted. It gives you the ability to do anything you want with those funds. But when you restrict something, when you go to the CMA and you restrict the fund, those dollars can only be used for the purpose that they were intended to use for. They can't be used for anything else. So a major question was, when we started the CMA campaign this year, a lot of people said, I'm not going to give to it because I don't want that money to go to this bank house. And in fact, it can't. They're restricted and can only be used for those items that are articulated in the CMA campaign. And later on, Dan will talk a little bit more about what we have on our balance sheet, restricted and unrestricted. Yeah.
I was gonna say, when they talk about the number of households, do they just look at literally the number of households that actually participate and contribute
My understanding is the former. It's the total number of, and don't ask me how they accumulated this data, but it's the total number of Catholic households in our boundary. Whether or not they come to Mass, whether or not they go to another church or don't go to church at all. It's just that's the database that they have.
So
my understanding, there's nothing we can do about it.
Mike,
Yeah.
if anybody has a comment, please come up to the mic and not talk where you're seating, because those that are streaming cannot hear what you're saying. So I would like to invite everyone to please come forward, either side, if you have a comment or a question. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Lisa.
Hold on, the mic's not on.
My name's Lisa, and I was just wondering, can we expect a visit from the diocese, some representative, to explain all this, or at least?
I mean, my explanation wasn't good enough.
No, it's excellent, but I just feel.
That's a good point, and I'm sure.
Why haven't they been here? A letter from the bishop is not appropriate, in my opinion.
I think that's a great question, and I'm sure that if we ask them, and if the parish we feel it would be helpful to have somebody from the diocese come and explain it better, we would secretly do that.
And we'll be recording minutes, so any questions that we can't answer, we'll make sure they get recorded. At some point they get answered, whether that's us getting back to you via a letter, a meeting, or potentially asking somebody to come out. I'm Dan Hofford, by the way. Finance guy.
Any other questions? Now's the time.
I'm Mike Malone.
I'm great.
Good. I'm Frank Euchre. Mike, I have a couple of questions based on what you've said to us so far this evening. Number one, the amount of $55 million that is for the settlement. It's my understanding that it's pending the bankruptcy court, has to be approved by the judge. And secondly, it has to be approved by the victims.
That's correct. It has to be approved by the judge, and assuming he does that, then it goes to the victims, and they take a vote as well.
Okay, so this is not written in stone that this is the amount that's going to be acceptable yet in the settlement. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Number two, in terms of the amount of $396,000 for our parish, can you tell me the collective amount and percentage by all the parishes that they're being assessed versus what would the diocese put up? Is it 50-50? Is it 75-20? Can you break that down?
I don't have that. I don't have those numbers back. I wish I did. It's certainly something we can get. I just don't know how much of the 55 million came from the diocese, like unrestricted funds that they have available versus what they need to collect from the parishes. I don't know.
But I think that's an important point for this room and for the parishes to understand. Are we contributing 90% of the settlement to parishes versus 50% of revenue? That's great.
I can't get the exact amounts, but I do know that the diocese, it is giving, I would say significantly more than the parishes collectively.
Okay.
It's not a 50-50, it's mostly the diocese and then the balance coming from the parishes.
And thirdly, in your presentation, like you had a date, is this something that's due in a couple of months, June or something of this year?
Well, only if the court did approve it and they went through that process. But right now, you're being told that the amount that I just articulated will need to be sent up to the diocese to go into that trust fund by June 1.
And yet, when will the settlement possibly be approved by the court? So we're depositing money
Well,
without knowing whether or not this is an acceptable amount.
our finance committee hasn't really decided if we're really going to do that at that point in time.
Do what?
Send a check if we don't know exactly the final time. I mean, you're right, why send it prematurely if you can sit on it for more investment.
And I'm aware that the CMA has not met its goal. And at this point in time, that reflects, 80% participation, whatever it may ask for that amount. That's far less than the 396. So what is the alternative, or what is the result if the parish doesn't respond to the obligation that the diocese is saying we'll have to share?
Which obligation, CMA piece?
No, towards this settlement, 396.
I think they're basically demanding that we pay the 396. If we can't, there may be some parishes that can't do it. We're in a position, which I failed to mention, and I'm glad you brought it up. Unlike a lot of other parishes, and Dan's going to get into this more detail, and if you want to look at something being the glass empty, the glass half full, we have a balance sheet that allows us to do this. And still, after the payment that we make, whenever we make it, we're still going to have a strong balance sheet afterwards. So we're in a better position than a lot of others. Our intention is to go ahead and comply with this when we need to. And the reason we want to do that is it's like an insurance policy to protect us from any future claims that may come. So that's why.
I do understand future claims will be referred directly to the insurance companies and maybe on the hook.
No, I don't know that we're gonna have any insurance companies involved with this anymore, to be honest with you. It's gonna go to the trust fund that's being set up.
Okay. So are you saying that the parish would pay the 396 out of its assets, and then the collection from the parish and parishioners would come later if this is approved?
No, and Dan's gonna get into this.
Okay.
Again, we're fortunate to have funds that we built up over time, unrestricted funds, well in excess of 396.
Okay.
We're gonna use those funds, not anything from collections, new collections. We're gonna use those funds from our savings right now, right off of our balance sheet, to make this payment. And if we're short on the CMA, we'll do the same thing with that.
Right. No, I understand the parish has that obligation towards the CMS,
Right.
but I wasn't sure or wasn't understanding the parish would front the 396, and then the parish here would have to make that up back to the church. Right?
No, we're gonna make the payment directly from reserves.
Okay.
And that's it.
Okay, thank you.
Mike, I have a question.
Yeah.
The money from the diocese, is that insurance money or above and beyond that?
Okay, so the $55 million that I mentioned is gonna come from the parishes and the diocese, the unrestricted funds, which Dan said is, I don't know if it's 60-40 or 70-30, but most of that's coming from the diocese. In addition to that, we're hoping there'll be insurance funds that'll go on top of that, that'll go into this trust fund. Anybody else?
I'm not sure if you can answer this more out of frustration. Why did we file bankruptcy? What did that gain the diocese? We seem to be paying an awful lot of money. I thought the bankruptcy was supposed to cap the liability of the settlement.
Well, the settlement will cap the diocese liability at that $55 million level. That's, if it gets approved, that's it. And then they reorganize under chapter 11, and they continue business. That's the way we did it, so they could cap it at a certain amount.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions about this? Because we do want to, this is not the real intent of the meeting, although it was important to get through it. The elephant's gone, let's be honest, there's nothing more we can do about this. And we're going to move forward now and introduce Dan, who is our new CFO, to take us through the financial situation that we've got to challenge with as well as we move forward.
Thanks, Mike. You guys hear me okay? Yeah. Well, I wish I was meeting some of you under different circumstances, but happy to be here and be part of this family. And go back here a bit to my favorite verse. This is how I live my life and how I'm going to treat my role here and in this process as well. Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. So with that said, and if there are, I'm sure you're going to have more questions. My email me. We'll answer your questions for sure as they come up. So can I take this off, Vicki? Is that okay? Okay, feedback. So the short of it is that this is a projection of our current fiscal year. Now, our fiscal year is a July through June calendar. So we're 8 months through the fiscal year. Currently, we're projected around 70,000, give or take. That just simply means it's not a reflection of how much money is in the bank. That's simply stating over a 12-month period, we will have spent $70,000 more than we brought in. And that does not include the CMA shortfall. As of today, it's $23,500. So of course, the first question, well, how did we get here? And it's really the perfect storm. I think the pandemic is the biggest reason. You'll see some charts in a moment that show, pandemic, and you guys know this just from coming to church. Everything dropped. We're slowly coming back, but that was the biggest culprit. The bankruptcy settlement may have had an effect, and not specifically on the dollar amount, just simply, when people heard about the news, they may have said, you know what, I'm not giving anymore. So it's kind of possibly an indirect effect. Clustering as well, the change. Anytime you change, merge, things like that, some people don't like the change, so that may have an impact as well. And then change in demographics, that's really just stating that, this is a long-term trend as well. Declining offerings, rising expenses, and the rising expenses, I would say it's not because of reckless spending or anything like that. My predecessor did a very wonderful job. You'll see in a moment, expenses were tracking revenue, but what has happened in this past year is as expenses have started to rise because we're opening back up. There's more activities, also inflation, but the rise in income has not tracked with it. You may be aware too that we received a PPP loan. So about 2 years ago, it was 80,000, 70,000, something like that. So it's very helpful, but it may have masked some of these issues as well. So this is 10 years of revenue and expenses, and this top line is total revenue. The blue line is just the collections. And collections, when we talk about regular collections, that's the Sunday offerings, that's the online giving. Some of you do automatic withdrawals. That includes Christmas and Easter. So that includes a lot of different things. And that's, I think it's like over 90% of the total revenue. But I put both lines on there. As you can see, they pretty much track each other. And over the years, expenses have tracked very well. In last year, we had about an $8,000 surplus at the end of the fiscal year. But as you can see, we're now projecting our expenses are going up. And again, that's, we're returning to pre-pandemic levels of spending, factor in some inflation there too. But our giving is continuing to trend downward. This is the chart by the numbers. But you can see over the years, we've regular collections, this was about 10 years ago, 1.1, 1.1, 1.1, 1.1. I mean, it's tracking fairly steady. And then in 2019, it drops a little bit, 1.06, 996,000, 971,000, and this is the current projection, 912,000. And then if you look at the expenses, again, they tracked fairly well, 1.1, 1.2, 1.2, 1.2. They did go down here, 1.039, but now they're trending back upwards. And if we're happy, we can share these slides too, so don't worry about trying to memorize all these numbers by any means. So this is a projected condensed income statement for this current fiscal year. These are actual numbers, July through February. This is projected March through June. And then I just compared the total fiscal year projected versus last year's numbers. So again, regular collections, we're projecting about 912,000 versus 971 last year. And then on the expense side, it's a little bit higher as well. I just highlighted some of the bigger numbers here. Faith formation, funerals, weddings, liturgical costs, that's what other program expenses is. That's higher. And again, that's just a reflection of inflation and returning to pre-pandemic levels of activity. Building maintenance is a bit higher. Utilities, we've had a couple of repairs that we didn't anticipate. And then services and outsourcing. So this is a bit over. A big part of that is legal and accounting fees. The legal fees really related to the bankruptcy that were not budgeted. There was also a fee for Robert Half for bringing me on board. So that was a part that wasn't budgeted. It wasn't part of the budget last year as well. So then if you look down here, this is at 70, it's currently 77,000. It was a little bit higher than 70. That's just due to some monthly and cyclical numbers, but still we're around 70,000. I added in the $20,000 CMA shortfall. Hopefully we close that gap. But in the way our system is set up, the CMA is, we call it a below the line number. Our operating revenue, net revenue would be this. This would come out of our non-operating revenue, but it still is cash in this fiscal year. So that's why I added that there. So this is what Mike was talking about. We have a healthy balance sheet. As of the end of February, we've got a total of 902,000 in unrestricted cash assets. Some of that is in our checking and savings, but the vast majority is in our stable patrimony. It's a community fund, if that means anything to anybody, just an investment. But 902,000, this is the number where the 396,000 would come from. So, even if you take that out of there, to still have a $500,000 balance, especially when you look at some other churches in the diocese, that still is pretty good. It still is pretty healthy. We've got another 670 in restricted assets. The building fund is about 146,000. The rest of it is mostly perpetual charity and the youth fund that's going to be established. But those are restricted. So those numbers, the principal stays there, and then we take either a percentage each year, or we take the interest or dividends or things like that to fund grants and things of that nature. And then our liabilities are not much. These are just mass intention, some things we have to send the diocese for collections and payroll. That's for the bulk of that is we three of us are on St. Catherine's payroll, but we're shared. So quarterly we reimburse. That's all that is. So this is from fiscal year 21-22. but each year it generally looks the same. I just wanted to grab a full fiscal year with all the numbers and just show you how where the majority of our spending goes. Now, I want to mention this is by nature and not function. What I mean by that, when, let's say you give the Red Cross, and they say, well, 95 cents of every dollar goes directly to programming, right? Then you look here, in programming says 2%. And that's shockingly different. Two different ways of looking at it. This is, again, just the way our accounting system is set up. If we were to do that same calculation, our program expenses, you would take all the faith formation folks, most of the folks that get paid, and you would allocate that towards program expenses. Even a percentage probably of the admin folks would go to that. That's how agencies come up with that number. So that's the difference. That being said, our biggest expense is salaries. That includes FICA, benefits, health insurance, and things like that. The next biggest expense is the school assessment that we pay each year. And then buildings is probably closer to 10%. That's probably even higher. So going forward, I really encourage us to think a two-pronged approach. Right? Let's get through the next 3 to 4 months, make the payments that we need to make, and go into next fiscal year with a balanced budget. So we're working on that now. You may have heard me mention task force and things like that. Really, we're going through the budget. We're looking where we can cut costs. And there are areas. I mean, we can, things like copiers and phone systems and contracts with our snow and lawn vendors. And we're going to work together with St. Catherine's to look for economies of scale on stuff, on a lot of those things. The flip side is other expenses are also going up. Utilities, we're anticipating utilities going up, health insurance going up, our insurance for general liability, which is administered through the diocese. And we get, by working some of these things with the diocese, of course, we get heavy discounts because it's not just one church or two churches, it's the entire diocese. But, I think part of our short-term plan really is this, just having open, honest communication, transparency, and having conversations. What is people's interests? What are people's commitment? Talking to folks. Some folks have no idea where the money goes, so just educating on where those things go. And I would say that there probably will be an appeal of some sort in the short term, right? Let me take a step back. So we're also looking at our parish roles, our database, if you will. It's called Parish Soft. We're going through to clean that up, update it, if you will. And I will say this: a lot of people have asked, if we clean the roles up, is that going to lower our assessments, the school, the CMA, and all that? And the short answer is no. It's really not. The diocese actually uses a different database, which it's called Denari. They use that for the Catholic Courier and all of our assessments. They do on a monthly and annual basis compare it to our records. But as Mike said earlier, it's not just registered members of a parish. They look at every territory and see, and again, I don't know how they figure out registered Catholics in those territories, but those are the numbers they're using. Now, you could say, well, what if we went through and figured out, who's who and cleaned that up? Well, if we figured out a good way to do that, everybody would be doing that, and our percentages would all be the same. So I reached out to a number of my peers, and they all said the same thing. There's a lot of good reasons to clean up your roles for ministry, which is why we're going to do it, but it's not going to affect those numbers significantly, if at all. So that being said, though, we're kind of looking at basically two groups folks, of parishioners, right? And the first is everybody here, probably the folks watching online, and saying, probably in the very short term, there will be some sort of appeal, and it will be, X% increase in your regular giving, possibly a one-time gift, something of that sort. But we want to be very intentional about that, transparent about it, so we're working on those plans now. And then the other group would be folks that have, if you will, fallen off in the last 2 or 3 years during the pandemic. And I think the approach there is it's not to reach out and ask for money. It's really just to reach out and see how they're doing. Right? We have no idea. In some cases, we don't know why people left. So we have to figure out a way to reach out and see where folks are at. And maybe some folks just went to a different church. Maybe they're upset about something and they need a phone call. Maybe they just need some encouragement. So we're working on a plan to make all that happen. And then, of course, that short-term plan is really coming up with a new budget for July 1st. And then a long-term plan, and that's beyond this coming year, and that really says, okay, how do we not just sustain, but how do we thrive? How do we invigorate parish life, both for us in St. Catherine's, working together wherever we can, and in some cases that may be bringing back programs that you used to do in the past. In some cases that may be starting new programs, but we'll develop some, call it task force or whatever, but it's leadership getting together, getting input from the parish at large, and figuring out the best way to do those things. And I say figuring out, there's a lot of great conversations already happening, and some really great ideas out there. Short term and long term, right? The message we're trying to send, we realize that when we talk about money, we're kind of preaching to the choir sometimes, right? This isn't a guilt message, and we want to be cheerful about this, but it is a reality that we're facing. And we want to say too that we realize, though I will say that it has been managed well, we realize that it's an obligation of ours continuing forward to manage well and be transparent. And aside from the constants, things like the Eucharist and liturgical things, what else can we do as a parishes to reinvigorate for the long term? So for those of you who like visuals, like myself, we've been meeting the last several months. Trustee meeting, we had a special finance council meeting. A couple of weeks ago, we met with the Parish Council and Finance Council, and here we are tonight. So down here, we're working on our short-term solutions. Like I said, appeals, cutting costs, working with St. Catherine's to restructure and share staff and other resources. And then probably in April, I would imagine, we'll be able to kind of go to the next step. And then the long term, let's get through this part first, but some of these conversations are happening at the same time, and then probably May and beyond, we can talk a little bit further. And I think you guys did some strategic planning pre-COVID, so we're looking at those things as well. We're not going to try to reinvent the wheel here. We'll take whatever information and feedback has already been given and factor that in. This is just rehashing what I just said, but revisiting, this is more the long term, revisiting mission, vision, goals. How do we achieve that? What staff and volunteers do we need in place? And then we work on our systems, organizing, updating our communication, the way we communicate, and package it up nicely and deliver it well. Questions?
what is the rectory being used for and maybe future plans? I assume Brother Mike's not there anymore.
We can hear you.
Can you put it up closer, raise it?
I assume,
Still not working.
yeah, I assume the rectory is vacant and what are current plans for it?
So I think Father Mike stays there on the weekends when he's coming out with masses here, but we'll have to so part of the calculation for the bankruptcy settlement included unrestricted cash assets, right? That's not an unrestricted cash asset. So I and others have kind of come to the conclusion it's probably best to wait until that matter is settled and gone forward, and then we could look at selling it. Or not, but I think right now it's better to just keep it as it is. I mean, it's not even, the interesting thing about the diocese, we don't depreciate assets, right? So none of our buildings are on our balance sheet. So, if this deal falls through and there's another assessment, they reevaluate, it's best to just kind of keep that off. So that's probably the approach right now.
I did have a question, this may be from ignorance for the process, but I'm just kind of confused because you said that the reassessment of the households and all that, the parish, will not have any effect on future assessments or what we owe, yet that's what's being used along with the CMA, which is based on households, to come up with the number that we have to pay. So on one hand, it's being used to show what we pay, and on the other hand, you can't use it to see how much we're not assessed in the future. I don't quite understand.
Yeah, we go, are you talking about in regards to the bankruptcy or in all regards?
Just because somebody asked a question about if we reassess, that's not really going to have much impact on what we're assessed in the future. It doesn't really have much of an effect on that.
I'm just trying to get back to the formula here. So when I talk about the database, the roles, it's only a portion of a couple different formulas. And if we change those, if we, let's say, lower our number of registered parishioners in our database, it doesn't change that formula because that's not the database that the diocese uses. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question?
No, not well.
Because I'm not understanding.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It may just be ignorant of the system.
If you go back and look at the formula where they split up 4 equal quartiles, the data that they used, or the statistics they used, was the database that is maintained by the diocese. And it really is just, in this case, in the first one, the number of Catholic, I don't know how they came up with it, but it's their database and they have that for every parish. There's nothing we can do about it. But what Dan's saying is moving forward, as we look at the predicament we're in where expenses are going up faster than revenue, we need to reach out to people that are in our boundary, in our parish, that currently aren't active and they're not. And the way we can do that is look at our roles that we have of registered parishioners and clean those up. Some of those people are gone, they have died, they have gone to Florida, maybe going to St. Louis. We need to clean that up just so that we can use that to reach out to those people in the future to see if we can get them to be more active in our parish. So does that kind of answer it? The other thing I think Dan was saying is if we press the diocese too much and clean up their database, all the parishes would do that. All the parishes would do when they're, and the question is if everybody did it, yeah, you may have better data, but everybody's numbers may come down and it may not have changed the percentages at all. We're not given that option at all. They're going to go with their database now. They need to settle this now, and they're going to use that database.
Okay.
I have
I have one question, and it's a very innocent question, because I'm sure there's a lot of variables to this answer that I'm not privy to. I'm wondering if anyone has approached the diocese concerning possibly selling the large campus that they are in right now. It seems to me as if that's quite a large, it's a lot of money, it's a lot of property, it's a lot of upkeep for that building. I'm sure that's probably a very sensitive subject, but I'm just wondering if that might help if they were to do that, sell that, or the Pope sell some of the paintings or something. I just know in our family, if we need money, I look through the house and I go, okay, what do I have that I can sell? You know, there's
Sure, yeah.
That's it.
Yep.
Yeah, very innocent.
Well, that will be one of those questions that we record and ask the diocese. And it's a legit question. It came up down the road as well. I can't speak to it, but I'll ask the question at some point.
Thank you.
I'd maybe just like to add on to what you were talking about, Mike, because it is very confusing in terms of the parish, its size, the number of participants, et cetera. I recognize a lot of faces from several years ago when we did this sort of strategic planning, and we started a process and COVID came back in, but we stressed the importance of understanding the demographics of our parish. And we want to spend a lot of time really delving into that to understand the makeup of our parish. Understand, if you will, who our customers are and who they might be. And once we understand those groups, as we build plans for the future, we can build plans based on the needs of, and recognizing that there are different groups who have different needs. So that's why we talk of cleaning up our database so we can go forward on the long-term plans. On the other side is the diocese, their list, and that's sort of like the US Census. And it's a big number, and that's what it's going to be. And we need to work on ours for very, I'll call them personal, and if you will, parish-driven goals, as opposed to the amount of money that we're being assessed using this formula, using the diocesan list of Catholic households.
How about online? Are we getting any questions online?
No. Okay. Quiet.
So, we saw the elephant. There's probably another elephant. It would be nice to hear from someone from the diocese come speak to us about how this boils down to $390,000 for the local parish to pay, when we know, based upon all we've heard and read, that the mistakes and errors were happening not necessarily on a local basis, not necessarily on a diocesan basis. That the leadership errs and the parishioners must pay. I haven't quite put that problem together in my head enough to even answer it for myself. But maybe there is. Maybe, I'm sure it has to do with ecclesiastical law. But maybe that might need to be changed a bit too. Because certainly there are assets beyond ours that could come into play, and we haven't seen how that will work. It sounds like the parishes are paying, the diocese is paying, the insurance companies are paying. What about up there, Ira? I would really like to know what would be said about that, if you're asking.
I'm not being facetious here, by hierarchy, you're talking about Rome or?
Yeah.
My first thought was talking about God, but that's what I mean, not being facetious.
No, I don't mean to be obtuse about it, but yes, there's an archdiocese.
Yeah.
And then there's Rome. And I guess the money flows one way, but I'm wondering why in this situation it would. The generals erred, the soldiers are paying.
Yeah.
That's.
I think it's a great question. And I'm just gonna say that's one of the ones that we'll capture, and my hope is that when things get settled, there will be more communication from the diocese on all of these matters. That's my hope. I don't know if that's a safe assumption or not, but if not, we certainly are gonna, I guarantee you, we're not the only ones asking these questions. Everybody is. So if the diocese isn't proactive in coming out and answering these, certainly the parishes will be reaching out and asking for answers.
Yeah, I have two questions. The first one is probably going to be unanswerable and sort of the same nature as Leo's question, but I'm assuming that we're all full members of the Catholic Church as much as any other people who are attending church in any other parish. And bad things happened, and we have victims out there. And it's horrendous. It hurts to read about it, but it's our church, and we can't throw up our hands and walk away. I mean, this parish has come to the table for victims of natural disasters, all kinds of things, and been happy to try to make life better or make people more whole. And I think we need to make these people whole because they are victims. There's no question about it. And whatever the number is and however it was calculated, it's got to come from somewhere. So I think by default, we're here. The point is, what about the future? I mean, if people were injured in our parish because the roof fell in, and we had to pay for the injuries and all the damages, we've made pretty sure we got a good roof so that it doesn't happen again. And, I could see where nobody was at fault. People were just coming to church and the roof fell in. And it's maybe not a good analogy, but here's a situation where I don't think we've had any instances in our parish. But to the extent that the money has to come from somewhere and it happened and we're full members of the church and of the parish, okay. But what about the future? Can we put some pressure on somewhere to make sure that things don't continue to be covered up and that this doesn't continue? And I don't know that anybody can answer that question, but it seems to me that's where we should get something back. I believe this is just. We have to pay. They're victims. I'm sure those people, the parents of those kids, would much rather not have the money and have their kids be whole and healthy. So that's the point I'm trying to make is what are we doing about the future? The second question is more in terms of when you talk about strategic planning going forward. We have a model here where expenses are going to exceed revenues, right? And again, this parish, I was on the finance committee for a number of years. This parish always stepped up when there was a need. And when we put the addition on the other building, we sat at people's kitchen tables and they welcomed us. When we came in and asked them for money and they delivered. We had people who pledged
over a period of time, they moved away and they continued. I think 98 or 99% of the people made good on their pledges, despite the fact that some of them didn't even live here anymore. So I don't think that people are afraid to give for a reason that they understand. But we have 2 campuses and we have this clustering plan, and it doesn't seem like a permanent solution. So if we look at the expense side, are we looking at least to show what would happen if we would consolidate and bring, it would definitely have an impact on costs, and I understand it's going to have a lot of other impacts as well. But it may be that we don't find a solution just by trying to get more parishioners, particularly in an environment where I think less people are coming to church, not just our parish, not just Catholic churches, it's just in general. And it seemed to me that we should at least be ready to talk about what it would look like if we would take a second step, if you will.
Sure. Yeah, so the first point, I don't know if I can answer that question per se, but there is some good points to make that when we talk about victims, just something to think about that statistically speaking, there are probably people in our church that have been sexually abused. Not saying here at the church, but or they know somebody that has. So it's just something to think about as we talk about this, right? To be sensitive about that. Another point about that. Karen Reinford.
You get the second.
All right.
I know some of you. Up until 2020, I worked for the diocese as the Safe Environment Coordinator. So I was dealing with the prevention part, which is what the question was about. So since the early 2000s, the Catholic Church in the US has done a lot of different things in terms of preventing future abuse. And looking at the number of allegations that get reported every year, it's across the country, it's infinitesimal at this stage. There was a flood in the 70s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and a bit before that. So what we're doing now as a church in the US, learning, but there is safe environment training that happens as part of the process for seminarians. It's there for all clergy. It's there for employees and anyone who volunteers in the church. Originally, it was those who worked directly with children or youth. Then it got extended to those who visited and worked with the homebound. So those who went to communion calls, those who went to nursing homes. And more recently, it's been extended to anyone who really works in almost any ministry, including our liturgical ministries. That's the prevention part. There's training. There's also background checks. I work for 7 churches up in Greece now. I make sure that happens for their people. I think Meg is, I believe, is the one who's doing it here. There she is. So we take it very seriously. Do we think someone might slip through? Could be. I hope not. I'm hoping that by training more people to know what to recognize for, because as a society, we've learned a lot more about the impact of sexual abuse. We've learned long-term for adults, not just kids. We've learned more about the prevalence. We know more about what are the warning signs that someone is, might be someone you don't want anywhere near kids. We have, just like other organizations that have learned, like the Boy Scouts, that's another big one. No more one-on-one, one adult, one child. We work with youth ministers, with faith formation people. how can you always avoid those situations? Can you plan ahead so that those things don't happen? And if someone breaks a boundary, so if you see someone one-on-one with a child or a vulnerable adult, the training talks about where do you report that? Civil law, in terms of civil authorities, because odds are really good they're not in the church. They could be, but it's just as likely to be someone a child knows, someone in their family. So if something happened and you were suspicious, how could you report that? So all that's part of the prevention. The other piece that has gone on with bankruptcy cases in other dioceses, and this gets to the second part, is, well, you know, is this going to get reported, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, is that victims committees, before they will agree to a settlement, they will usually say, these are the stipulations we want in addition. So they'll look with a fine tooth comb over what's happening already, and they'll say, yeah, that's pretty good, but what about this too? And build this into your policies, build this into your practices. So the victims are empowered that way to really look very, very carefully at what's happening in our diocese and insisting that it happen differently.
Thanks, Karen. So part two, the clustering. So
I have one more question, I think, before your part two. So I guess one of the things that I'm thinking about here is that when is our ability, what kind of abilities do we have to resist? In other words, I'm channeling my husband who passed away. He's saying this to me. Where are we to say no? We are not participating in this $400,000 contribution to the settlement. How much negotiation do we have? Is there any? It seems to me that we say yes, because we have to. But what happens if we push back, and how much can we push back?
I don't have an answer for you, to be honest. In any of the meetings that I've had with the diocese and speaking with my peers, no one's really talking like that. Right? The common understanding is it needs to be paid, and whether you want to say we have to pay it or because we're all part of a larger church, and as the gentleman here said, you know, we're all, for lack of a better word, I don't know, it's not your words, but in this together type of thing. At least that's how I'm interpreting the conversations. Is there somebody that's going to say, hey, we're not going to do it? Possibly. Could we do that? I suppose we could. What would happen? I have no idea. But I would say that if that's a position that the church is going to take, that would have to be something that there would have to be, first of all, your pastor, you have to be in agreement with that. Then the leadership councils and the parish at large, and then know what the potential consequences would or could be. So part two, clustering. I'm going to invite Karen Reinford to comment on this if I'm mistaken on any of this, but this is just a quick little visual to show, at least in my, 4-5 month stay here, my understanding of what a clustering process looks like. And it really, starts with a shared support staff. And you had that several years ago when Maureen started working at more than one church. And I think Laura, or Laura's predecessor, currently this is where we're at. A shared pastor, we share the bulletin, some mass schedule, the mass schedule, some other programming, some other programs. The next step, when I talked earlier about the short-term plan, bringing our budgets into balance, that's what this is. More shared staff, communications, vendors, and systems. Now, some of you may have heard me mention in prior meetings this idea of merging our corporation to save costs. And I didn't know this, but Karen helped educate me a little bit that before we can even do that, we have to go through canon law. So and that's a whole process in and of itself. And then we could talk about, then you could merge the corporation itself. And then the next step would be merging the parish law, going through canon law, civil law, one parish with potentially multiple worship sites. And this isn't necessarily part of a clustering process, but in some cases it ends up being so, where you have one parish and one campus. In other words, you effectively close a church. I would say and correct me if I'm wrong, Father Rob or anybody else here, I think it's safe to say, we're not going back. We're not going to have one pastor for one parish. And I think it's safe to say to expect that we will do more merging. That doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be one building, right? And there's not necessarily any timeline. In my opinion, this is my opinion, it really comes down to the will of everybody and the finances, right? If you can sustain both churches financially, great. And if everybody still desires to have two separate churches, great. When those things start to not be the case, that's when you look at the next step. So I think, the reality is, and I want to be sensitive to some of the staff members here, and some of the folks down at St. Catherine's, but when I talk about short-term budget, and I mentioned it in some of the slides, we will be probably cutting some positions, or at the very least, cutting some hours back. That's our biggest expense. And unless we get a major increase in sustained giving, not necessarily one-time gifts, but sustained giving, so we can budget that every year, we're going to have to make some cuts. So that's, and we're having conversations, and we have to be sensitive about that and make sure, and I want to say too, we're not looking at it as just simply cutting staff for hours. We're looking at it and saying, okay, when we begin to restructure roles, what's going to be not just efficient, but how can we put people in places where, according to their gifts and strengths, is what I'm trying to get at. So that's the process we're going through. I would say, this next year, we're probably going to be in this. We're going to probably remain two separate churches, sharing resources. And then as we go through this year, when I talk about long-term visioning, we'll have more conversation about if we go to the next steps or when we go, and really putting in some markers. We can say, great, let's stay like we are, but let's put some measurements in place so that if we get to this point, that triggers the next step in the process, if you will.
If a plug. I'm afraid sometimes are we getting the cart before the horse? We're talking about clustering, and it seems to have a focus of buildings and people. And what I would like to think of is that just like our country, the more we open our doors, the more diversity we have, the more opportunities we create. If we go about clustering as a negative, we're going to do away with. I've been in business. I was in business all my life. We never made a long-term plan by cutting expenses. It was, what are we going to invest in? And that's what this future planning is about. It's about building a plan that says, what do we need to do to really get people involved? Because if people involved, the monies will come. You know, the buildings will be defined by, you know, what we're trying to do. But the goal really of clustering has to be, how do we create an environment in a parish that is vibrant so that we attract more people? Not what clustering is about, how do we combine the buildings? And I just think we need to keep focus on the actions that we define as being part of clustering.
That's a great point, John. And there's a number of us that have been talking. I'm very optimistic. I think there's parishes throughout the country that are thriving and growing. They do things differently. You know, a lot of things are done differently. But that's what we'll be taking a look at this year. That's my 2 cents.
I want to talk about what's not being said yet, that I think is a bit of another elephant in the room. And that is, when I look around at Mass, I don't see anybody else my age. If you, this has nothing honestly to do with your bankruptcy piece specifically, it's more a general comment. If you're struggling to find money from the parish, I think you need to look at my generation and realize that a lot of us, certainly myself, but you know, a lot of us feel forgotten. It just, you can't pretend like the next generation isn't the ones who are supposed to pick up where the last generation left off. And right now there aren't really ministries for us. And I'll tell you something else. You talk about all the people who were losing in the Catholic Church. I don't think I would still be a Catholic if it weren't for having grown up in this parish and this particular brand, I guess, if you want to call it that. And I feel like we're losing our identity in this clustering. I don't feel like this is Transfiguration. I feel this slide in particular really scares me, and I think it's taking me one step further away. And if you really want to look at the finances of the parish, I think you need to look at ways to bring my generation back instead of pushing them away further.
Mary Glasgow, in case anybody doesn't know. To address the young lady that I don't know her name, I'm sorry. Rebecca, hi Rebecca. That has always been a problem at this church. I moved here when I was about 23-ish, and I had always asked, is there anything for the 20-somethings, the 30-somethings? And there has never been anything really specific to the 20-somethings and 30-somethings, and I think that's a beautiful point to bring up. So thank you.
I'd invite, if anybody else wants to say something about that, but I'll say, Jen, I think, you know, those are conversations we're having, and appreciate what you said, and I think that's great, right? If there's nobody new coming in, there won't be a church for very long. So well said.
As we think about the short and long term, trying to increase our income, I wonder if you could say anything about how that's worked in the past. I mean, we've had, I was really pleased to hear, the gentleman earlier say that, when we've had big, projects, that people were willing to give. But I think it also seems that we need, more sustained giving. And I know over the last, times 10 years I've been at the parish, periodically, there will be an appeal for, could you increase by 5% or whatnot. And I'm just curious, have those rules borne out? You know, is that a model that works? Is that something we can expect to work again? Are we hitting the limit point of, you know, the same people do their 5%, but, you know, everybody's gonna have a point where they can't really add to that? I'm just curious if our past performance, you know, has anything to say about how that will play out in the future.
I might invite some of the finance council members to speak on this too, that have been here in the past, but judging, you know, from what I've heard and seen, yes, when asks are made of this church, the parish steps up, right? So that gives me confidence that when we do appeal with a specific number and amount, that that will hopefully be the case as well. I think it will. Is there a ceiling for that? Maybe. But we won't know until we ask, right? And that's really the first step. And we're, you know, we're probably weeks away from doing it. And listen, there's nothing to say. I mean, as you can go home tonight, if anybody can go home and start giving extra, right? We just want to be very intentional with the ask. Deliver it well, I guess. Did I answer all your question?
Yeah, I think just, it may help too to phrase it as, I don't know if in our budgeting, we can shift things from ongoing expenses that just turn into, well, everybody could give a little bit more, to some more, I won't say bigger thing, but if you can see what you're giving to, as opposed to just, okay, it's a little bit more, and we just kind of keep doing the same thing, but it just costs more.
Yeah.
You know, it feels different when, you know, it's going to a new building.
Sure. Sure. My desire as the finance director is that, you know, on a regular basis, you're getting very clear updates on how the money is spent. And I know you've gotten updates in the past, but I think there's a lot of streamlining that I want to do, right? So, and I'm still learning myself. So I think, you know, it's probably going to take a while. I mean, it could take 6 months to a year, where I personally feel like in my role, I clearly understand everything and then can clearly articulate it. I work very methodically. Takes a little longer, but I found that it generally delivers better results in the long term. So you'll hear me and the staff probably get tired of hearing me say, well, hold that, we're getting there. But I don't want to make changes, not that I'm the one making the changes, but in general, I don't like to make changes for the sake of making changes. You know, simple things like the way we organize our filing system, for example. We want to clean that up, but what I want to know is, based on the big picture stuff, vision, mission, right? And we figure out, okay, great. Everybody thinks that these are the things that are going to reinvigorate parish life. Excellent. And here's the people and places here's the people we have to have in place. And then we build our systems based on that. That's the process we're kind of following. So that when we get to that point and somebody says, hey, Dan, where did this money go to? I'm not racking my brain and running around trying to figure things out. It's a simple answer. And in fact, you don't even have to ask me, because it's already out there. That's the idea, at least in my mind. And I think we're working towards that.
I just want to say one thing. Thank everybody for your comments this evening and what you've shared. Who knew almost 2 years ago I'd be standing here tonight talking about this particular subject? And I want to thank John. I thought John's comments were very profound. You know, this parish and other parishes, when there's a call to go out to help people in dire need, they respond wholeheartedly. So just back to the bankruptcy, those who've been abused, you know, I believe, why wouldn't we step up to help them as we step up to help all the other things that are before us week after week, year round, year round? Why is it any different? Parish identity as this young person just said, is important. I love the parish I grew up in, which no longer exists. It closed. I've been in many parishes in my spiritual journey, and each have their own identity. And things are different. It's 2023. Indeed, we want to try to address the young people and everybody's needs. But I know this community's prayed from the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed. One, what does one mean? Holy, what's that mean? Apostolic. Does one holy apostolic just mean Transfiguration? St. Catherine of Siena? Individual identities, which is rich and we need, but is that who we are ultimately called to be? Jesus did not stay in one place. People wanted him to stay in one place. He said, no, I got to get up and I got to move and expand and share what my message is about. So just some of the thoughts that have come to my heart this evening, listening to all of you and listening a few weeks ago to the people down the road. One, holy, apostolic.
Please regard what Father Rob just said as the last word. But considering the subject and content of tonight's presentation, and the likelihood that the messengers were going to get shot, I just want to commend Mike and Dan for their graceful presentation tonight. You've done a wonderful job.
And I know that, is it Sarah? You have some closing statements as well.
Oh, I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, so hi everybody, I'm Svante. I'm kind of new to the parish, been here for a few years. And at first, my main reason for coming up here is to commend you all. I'm a bit of a numbers guy, and when I'm thinking about what I'm donating to, what you did today and showing us that balance sheet, showing us that result sheet, and showing me what it really costs, that makes me much more motivated to contribute than just having an ask. And if you have any conversations with the diocese, I would wish that they would do more of that too. When they come and ask for the CMA, we get a presentation about the different programs they have, but I've never seen a cost breakdown of what the CMA is actually used for. And to me, that would make a difference. And I just wanted to share that view. And speaking of that balance sheet, I have a question for you. And that is that we have substantial assets on our balance sheet still, which is good. Are those assets working for us in generating an income at this point, or is that something that the parish have considered?
Yes, they are. The stable patrimony and the facilities fund are in a communis investment fund, which is done through the diocese. All the churches participate in it, and I think it's done fairly well. It has done fairly well over the years. Our perpetual charity fund is with CBIS, another investment firm, and I believe that's done fairly well also. And then there are some restricted assets that, some other assets that will be going into probably one of those funds as well. So yeah, generally speaking, they're invested well and doing very well. And give a shout out to Kuhn Gorman, who's been our Formerly a finance council member, currently an advisor to the finance council, and all the folks on finance council that have really been on top of those funds.
And may I say just one thing? I know we sent out postcards from Pastoral. Yeah. We passed along the postcards. Are there anybody that wants to pass a question down? If you have one, now would be the time to do that. If there was something you wanted to ask, but that didn't necessarily want to come to the microphone. And is there anybody on streaming as well? Thank you.
As of right now, I've been watching just the streaming chat to kind of keep track of the questions that have been coming in, and we haven't really had a lot of them. I think at the highest point during this conversation that we're all having here, there were about 30 people on the live stream on YouTube, plus everybody in this room. That's what we're looking at here. So obviously there's some information out there that Dan can share with everyone. And I would encourage you to go out and, speak to the other parishioners, because there's a lot of people that are not here and are maybe not hearing this message right now. To play a little bit off of just what Father Rob said, yep, we are one church, we absolutely are. But one thing that he did say is to move. That's what Jesus did. He got up, he moved. And as a parish, we need to get up and move. We need to get up and do something, because if we don't generate more revenue, eventually that balance sheet that we have that looks fairly healthy for now is going to dwindle and dwindle, and we're going to end up clustering more, and we need to come up with a solution to that, and we need to do it quickly. The only way we're truly going to do that is if we get out and we figure out how to use this wonderful campus that we have and the resources that we have to bring more of the community in. There are ways to do it, and we're going to need everybody's input, especially the youth, the young families, the people who are going to be here in the long term at this church. So I encourage you to please go out, speak to the other parishioners, join one of the committees if you have ideas of what we can do and how we get ourselves out of this. But for the time being, that's what I have. Thank you for being here, everyone.
The link, I believe, will still be available, so we can still share this meeting tonight if people were unable to make it. I know when we did it at St. Catherine's, there was by the second week there was over 300 views of the video. So hopefully, as you talk to people that couldn't make it, more will chime in and be enlightened. Sarah, right?
Yeah.
All right.
Not at all. Hi guys, I'm Sarah. I'm a sophomore at Pittsford High School and the youth representative on the parish council here. Hearing all this can be overwhelming and scary, but I want to share with you what Transfiguration, our church, means to me and the young people here. As you can remember when you were a teenager and growing up, you had your doubts when somebody been loud, scary, pulled you away from God. Everyone in our youth program has had our doubts, and many of us still do. But we show up to youth group, mass, and within our community here because of the people and how supporting, loving, and welcoming they are. We show up because we care, we belong, and because we love Anne and the relationship she has helped us shape with God. Many of us have our doubts and things we don't understand within our religion, yet we can still look past them and still choose to come to Transfiguration. Many of us feel that this church is the place for us, that we're loved and accepted despite our flaws, doubts, and worries. We still show up because we want to be a part of this community, shape our relationships with God, because we love it. I love our church. I love Transfiguration. I love our youth groups, our masses, our retreats, and the relationship it has given me with God. Lord, it is so good for us to be here in a place we feel welcomed, loved, cherished, and worthy. I love Transfiguration. The young people love Transfiguration. I hope you love Transfiguration.
Perhaps we should have started off with you, set a different tone, but thank you very much for those comments. And I want to thank everybody for coming here tonight. The people that showed up here, the people that are online, probably the last people we need to reach out and speak to about this, so I appreciate your comments. Rob, we do need to get out and do more about this, but again, if there's no other questions, I want to thank you all for coming out and pray for what we got to be successful in some of the things that we've got to do this next couple of years. Thank you very much, everybody.